On the morning of May 19, 1845, 129 men sailed from England aboard two of the most advanced ships the Royal Navy had ever built, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Their mission was the last great prize of exploration, the Northwest Passage. None of them would ever see home again. The question that haunts this story is not how they died, but why, at some point in the long, slow collapse of this expedition, no one gave the order to turn back while there was still time. And the answer is more unsettling than any single mistake. Sir John Franklin was 59 years old, a veteran of Arctic warfare and exploration. Stories told of how, on an earlier overland expedition, he had been reduced to boiling and eating his own leather boots to survive starvation. He was not a brilliant navigator, but he was steadfast, and the Admiralty valued steadiness. His second in command was Francis Crozier, an Irish officer who had served on 6 polar expeditions, including 4 years as second in command of James Clark Ross's Antarctic voyage. Serving aboard HMS Terror, Crozier knew ice. He had watched it, mapped it, and survived it. When the Admiralty offered him command of this expedition, he deferred to Franklin. Erebus and Terror were reinforced with iron, provisioned with 3 years of food, and equipped with auxiliary steam engines. The British Admiralty was not worried. They had sent the best they had. The expedition crossed the Atlantic, entered the Canadian Arctic, and settled into its first winter at Beechey Island. It was a quiet, disciplined encampment. And then, quietly, men began to die. First, John Torrington, a 20-year-old stoker, on January 1st, 1846. 3 days later, able seaman John Hartnell. Then, in April, Royal Marine William Braine. 3 graves dug into the frozen ground. The cause of death was likely pneumonia, complicated by tuberculosis. But something else was wrong. Modern autopsies would later reveal elevated lead levels in all 3 men. One likely contributing factor may have been the lead solder used to seal the expedition's 10 provisions, though the exact source remains debated among researchers. Whatever the cause, the message was already clear. Something was failing inside the expedition, even before the real ordeal had begun. But when the ice broke in the summer of 1846, the ship sailed on. No one turned back. By late September 1846, Erebus and Terror had entered the Victoria Strait, near King William Island. The ice closed around them, and this time, it did not release. The ships were beset. The men waited for the summer thaw of 1847. It never came. They were not merely stopped, they were held. The ice pressed against the hulls, and the hulls held, but the expedition could not move. The Arctic had accepted their presence and refused to let them leave. Somewhere in this second winter, Sir John Franklin died. On June 11, 1847, the man who had survived the Napoleonic Wars, the man whose legend had been built on chewing leather to stay alive, simply stopped. Command passed to Crozier, and the ice remained. The second winter trapped in the ice was worse than the first. 9 officers and 15 men were now dead. 105 souls remained, huddled aboard 2 frozen ships that had become their prison. On April 22, 1848, Captain Francis Crozier and Captain James Fitzjames made the most consequential decision of the entire expedition. They ordered the ships abandoned. 3 days later, on April 25th, Crozier wrote the message that would become the only first-hand record of what had happened. He scrawled it in the margins of a standard Admiralty form, then signed it alongside Fitzjames. H.M. Ships Terror and Erebus were deserted on the April 22nd, having been beset since September 12, 1846. And then, in Crozier's own handwriting, and start tomorrow, 26th, for Back's Fish River. 105 men, hauling sledges across the ice, setting out for a river mouth more than 250 miles away. with no certainty that anyone would be waiting when they arrived. 11 years later, in 1859, Captain Francis Leopold McClintock led a search expedition to King William Island. What his men found has haunted the historical imagination ever since. At Victory Point, they discovered the cairn containing Crozier's note, the only written record the expedition left behind. But further south, along the route the men had marched, they found something that defied comprehension: an abandoned sledge, still loaded. The men had been dying, starving, freezing, and they had been hauling silver cutlery, silver spoons and forks engraved with officers' crests, a copy of the Vicar of Wakefield, chocolate, not extra pemmican, not survival gear, not anything that could save them. The sledge was a museum of bad decisions, preserved in ice. No one survived. Inuit witnesses later reported seeing men collapse as they walked. Some accounts, fiercely disputed in Victorian London, but later confirmed by forensic evidence on King William Island, described the signs of cannibalism among the final stragglers. The expedition that had set out to conquer the Northwest Passage had been reduced to men eating the dead to stay alive for one more hour. So why didn't they turn back while they still could? Because there was never a single moment when turning back seemed necessary. At Beechey Island, 3 deaths were tragic, not alarming. When the ice trapped them, it felt like bad luck. Even after Franklin died, they told themselves, wait for the thaw. Every decision was reasonable in isolation, and every reasonable decision carried them one step further from survival. Catastrophic failure rarely wears the face of a single dramatic mistake. It arrives as a sequence of small, sensible refusals to accept that the world has already changed, until the sum of those refusals becomes irreversible. If this story moved you, subscribe and share your thoughts below.